Perfect. So today we're going to be talking about how Druva and AWS help you protect your data while you're on this cloud journey. My name is Prasanna Malayandi. I'm a cloud architect at Druva, and with me, my co-presenter.
Hey guys, my name is Girish Chanchlani. I'm a partner solutions architect at AWS. I work in the Amazon Partner Network storage team, so very closely with storage partners like Druva.
Thanks, Girish. It's great having you up on stage with us.
Yeah. Thank you.
So who is Druva? Druva is a cloud-native data protection solution that is used by over 4,000 plus enterprise customers. We are built natively on top of AWS, leveraging a lot of AWS services, which Girish will be talking about later in this presentation. Currently, we have over 150 petabytes under management, and every day we do more than 4 million backups a day. So everything is as a service, right, offering data protection. So no need to roll your own infrastructure, deploy, manage. We handle everything for you. It's all about simplicity. So what is the value of working with Druva, and how does Druva leverage AWS? So for our customers, we can offer much, much lower costs. Because you no longer have to worry about managing infrastructure, because you no longer have to worry about capacity planning and over-provisioning storage, we can lower the costs that you have to pay in terms of backup and data protection by up to 50%. Of course, you want your data protection to be secure and reliable. Backup, as you know, is your copy of last resort, so it needs to be secure and always available. And we leverage a lot of AWS services in order to make that possible. We are cloud native, so built solely on top of AWS. Everything is as a service, leveraging a lot of the new technologies AWS has in order to make ourselves very efficient and optimized and help pass on those savings to our customers. And finally, we ensure that you keep your data in compliance in terms of how long you need to keep your data, where you need to keep your data. We support multiple regions across the world, AWS regions, to ensure that you can meet your data sovereignty needs. So really, what is Druva? The vision for Druva is to help our customers centralize their data management and give visibility across all of their data sources. Not only their data centers, but also their endpoints, which could be laptops and desktops. It could also be your cloud applications that you might have other data residing in. It could be your data center workloads like virtual machines, file systems, and finally, your native cloud workloads that might be running in AWS. By bringing it all together, customers now get the benefits of our global deduplication to help them save space on their backups. Once all the data is aggregated together, you can now offer services, which is what Druva does. So for instance, going beyond just backup and restore, which is really the core reason you would buy Druva, we allow you to do other things. For instance, you might have compliance regulations that you need to meet. Druva can help you because we have access to the data and can help you meet your compliance needs. We have the ability to enable e-discovery. So for customers who have legal e-discovery use cases, we can help their legal IT admins actually figure out what data they need to pull and quickly pull that from their backup data. And finally, analytics and forensics. You might need to understand where your data is, what issues you might be exposed to. We can help address all of these use cases. So really, Druva is more than just backup and restore. It helps you enable all of these use cases based on having all the data together. So now you might be thinking, okay, I'm on this cloud journey, and I really need to be thinking about what matters to me from a data protection perspective. And it really comes down to these 4 points, right? With data protection, you never want to lose your data. That means that if I store my data in a storage array somewhere, I need to make sure if the storage array fails, am I going to lose my data? If so, I need to make sure I replicate it to ensure I protect myself. If something happens to the data center, is the data still available? As my data grows, and of course data is constantly growing in these environments, how easy is it for me to manage? As I add a new site, as I add a new application, how much more time is it going to take me as a backup admin to actually manage my infrastructure? Is it linear? Is it exponential? Right? I don't want to spend more and more of my time managing my backup infrastructure, because in that case, I'm not adding value to the business, which is really what I want to be focused on. With all this backup data, you have to worry about threats. There are threats every day. If you think about ransomware, if you talk about breaches, how do I ensure that I can keep my data safe and prevent these attacks from happening? And finally, backup data is a treasure trove of value. So how can I actually get more value out of the data that I have there, rather than just letting it sit idly? And really, this is what Druva helps provide to customers, is adding more value to their data, helping secure their data, and making sure that we never lose your data. So let's really talk about what are some of these values more in detail. When you think about SaaS data protection, you're really looking to say, how do I help reduce the cost of what I might have been doing before on premises? With Druva, we help significantly reduce your costs by using both our global deduplication, which helps reduce the total footprint my backups take by never having more copies of my data stored than needed. In addition, we also use forever incremental, so I can also save on my network costs, my bandwidth, and actually store data efficiently. As I add new workloads, as I add new sources of data, Druva seamlessly scales. So if I bring on a new site, for instance, I acquire a new company, I bring on the company and I'm trying to protect the data, I don't need to worry about how do I now create new backup infrastructure, how do I over-provision for that. Druva allows me to seamlessly start protecting that new data to the same Druva cloud without having to worry about things. We talked about some of these advanced data services. How do I get access to the forensics or the analytics to understand what is my data, where is it going? And finally, simple management. Usually when you look at traditional data protection solutions, as I add new premises or as I add new locations, managing that becomes more and more complicated. So I might have additional storage arrays in various locations. I might have additional media servers or backup servers that I have to start managing. With Druva, because we are a SaaS-based solution, everything just runs in the cloud. It's a single UI that sits in the cloud that provides for all of my data protection needs. And that's what SaaS is really about. It's just one place I go, everything is there. I don't need to worry about the backup infrastructure because as I'm on this cloud journey, why should I care about backup infrastructure? That should all go away. And that's what Druva provides. So really, if I think about Druva, here's kind of a very high-level architecture picture. On the left, you have your customer infrastructure, which could be on-premises. It could be VMware Cloud on AWS. We protect all these various workloads. On the right-hand side is really Druva's SaaS service at the upper right-hand side. We leverage a lot of the AWS services, such as S3, DynamoDB. We'll go into those details in a couple more slides. And we offer this as a fully managed service. As a customer, you don't have to worry about anything on the right. Druva manages where to efficiently store your backups, the security of your data, everything else. It's all as part of the managed services. And by the way, you pay one fixed cost. You don't have to worry about egress charges or pulling your data back for restores. Druva handles all of that as part of our service, which makes it very predictable for customers to figure out, for when I need to restore my data, what am I going to pay? With Druva, you don't pay anything additional. With some other solutions, you have to now start to worry, am I pulling it off of S3? Am I pulling it off of Glacier Deep Archive? You're now managing the cost, you're managing the infrastructure, you're doing everything on your own. Druva, we provide it all for our customers. So let's talk about what sort of data infrastructure you need as you're going on this cloud journey from a data protection perspective. And of course, I have Girish here from AWS. What sort of things do customers look for as they're on this cloud strategy or as they're on this cloud journey?
Sure. So from a backup and recovery perspective, one of the most popular storage services in AWS is S3, right? If you look at S3, there are various storage classes that are categorized based on how fast you want to access the data, and then they're priced accordingly, right? So for example, you have S3 standard that is designed for fast data access, and from a backup and recovery perspective, it makes sense to use it for hosting your active backup sets, right? Basically data, that backup data that is not older than 90 days old. Because if you noticed, most of your recoveries are done from that data, right? And then as your backup data gets older than that, essentially hardly you'll ever see anybody recover from that, and that data is usually kept for compliance reasons. So we have, to meet those requirements, we have services like S3 infrequent access, which from a pricing perspective is half the cost of what you would pay for S3 standard. Then we have Glacier, which is designed for data that needs to be kept for long periods of time, right? To meet your compliance requirements and things like that over there. In March of this year, we introduced a new storage class called as Glacier Deep Archive that is designed for data that is even colder. So data that needs to be kept for 10 or 15 years or even longer than that. And from a pricing perspective, it is priced very, very economically. It costs only $1 a terabyte a month to store data in that. And as you know, with S3, you get 3 copies of your data, right? So, I mean, nothing can be cheaper than that, I would say. So if you were to do a comparison with your on-premise systems, this is perfect for any kind of data where you're looking at using a tape-based system with a vaulting location, right? So just think of using Glacier Deep Archive over there. In terms of scalability, S3 is highly scalable. There is no infrastructure to provision. There is no capacity planning to be done. You basically just create a bucket, and off you go storing objects, right? So it's infinitely scalable. From a durability standpoint, S3 offers 11 nines of durability, which means that basically we are keeping our data in 3 separate copies, 3 separate locations, which are separate from each other by a meaningful distance, so as to protect against any sort of failures, okay, and errors. So we offer a wide variety of storage classes to essentially meet all of the backup and recovery and archive, I would say, use cases. Now, when you combine this with our OpEx pricing model, where you only pay for the resources that you use, and if you look at our this continuous innovation, right, where we are always looking at optimizing the way we run our operations, the way we run our infrastructure, so that we can run it in the most economical way possible, and more importantly, we offer those benefits back to our end customers, right? So right from when AWS was started in 2006, we have reduced our prices 76 times, okay? I mean, how many other companies do that? So, I mean, S3 can serve, so with all these, looking at all these, the wide variety of storage classes and the pricing models over here, S3 provides us very scalable, cost-effective storage medium. Now, from an application perspective, like Druva, which is running in AWS, having a scalable, resilient backend, storage service backend, is only half part of the equation. You need to make sure your database service, your compute service, that is scalable and resilient as well, right? So if you look at our database services, I mean, we offer 14 different services, but if we just focus on one of these, let's say DynamoDB. DynamoDB is a serverless NoSQL database, right? You don't have to manage anything at all. You basically just create a table, and off you go storing objects. And this is designed for keeping any sort of metadata information that needs to be frequently accessed, okay? In terms of performance, it is highly performant with access times in milliseconds. If you look at our compute services and look at our key compute service, which is Amazon EC2, we have a feature called as auto-scaling. So basically, you can easily scale up and scale down the number of instances that you want based on certain parameters, like the size of your workload and things like that over there, right? So to take an example here, using this architecture, right? So let's say from a backup application perspective, if when my backup windows kick in, that's where basically I want to scale up the number of instances that I have, so that I have as much power as I want to process that backup workload. And once that processing is done, I basically want to scale that back down to, say, 1 cos. Now think about how difficult that would be to do in a on-premise world. You have to deploy infrastructure, right? Manage the servers, need IT resources, things like that. So cloud is a perfect fit for these kind of scalable and resilient solutions. So Prasanna is going to talk more about how Druva's solution actually uses these services today.
Thanks, Girish. So let's take a look at how Druva leverages all the services that Girish just walked through: Amazon S3, DynamoDB, EC2, and of course, we'll end with Glacier Deep Archive. So Druva's built a global deduplicated storage on top of S3. S3 is great, as you know, it scales seamlessly. It's resilient based on 3 copies spread throughout. On top of that, Druva decided that yes, with backup data, we need to think about things slightly differently. When you have a backup workload, you're constantly writing fulls, right? Your full backup is constantly being stored all the time. Now, if you think about it, keeping a full copy, even in S3, could get quite costly if you have to keep your data for 3, 6, 9, 50 years, right? So instead of doing that, what we do is we actually provide the ability on top of S3 to globally deduplicate your data. So if you have the same file or the same part of the file being written multiple times, we only store one copy of that data in S3. In addition, we rely on forever incrementals to actually make sure, even though every copy is a full copy, that we're only sending incremental data. So we help save on network bandwidth and other things, which also lead to lower costs in the back end. Now, if you think about traditional on-premises backup storage, once you hit a certain limit, you're going to have to buy a new appliance, buy a new node, whatever it is, in order to start scaling out. With Druva, we're able to seamlessly scale based on whatever data you write because we are relying on S3, which is highly scalable. The next thing that we also leverage is the separation of metadata and data. Girish kind of alluded to that, but we leverage DynamoDB to store a lot of our metadata and other index. Now, you might be asking, why do you need to keep the two separated? One of the reasons we do so is to be able to scale each one independently. Storage is great for storing data, but if you try to do constant accesses to read your metadata back about what you actually stored on disk, that gets very expensive, and it also takes time. And at some point, you will hit a limit in just how you index in order to be able to get to that data. Instead, we leverage DynamoDB, which is infinitely scalable as well, to give quick access to the metadata. So now we can quickly look up where are blocks that are unique, or does this new data that came in, is that deduplicated, and can we write it down to disk or not? In addition, by having this separation of metadata and data, it also allows us to give access to the metadata independently of the data. So for instance, you might have an application, you might be wanting to do some analytics about file history times or other things like that, or even search. We don't have to go down to disk in order to find that information. We can pull it directly from DynamoDB, giving better access times. If you also look at a lot of the traditional on-premises infrastructure, once you get to a certain scale, your metadata starts to become a bottleneck. And so now and your storage might be totally fine. You could still keep going, but unfortunately you hit metadata bottlenecks, which affect performance. The only solution, you now have to deploy another appliance. And when you do deploy another appliance, now you have a separate deduplication domain, which leads to additional cost and wastage. Now, Girish alluded to the automatic scaling. So we leverage EC2 for our processing of data. And as Girish mentioned, backup, you're not doing backup 24/7. Right? You have your backup windows during which time you are doing your backup. So what do you do the rest of the time? Do you want to pay for that compute? With Druva, we're able to scale up and down as we see workloads come in, as we see backup windows starting to kick off. And in this way, we can reduce our costs, thereby helping our customers save money as well by giving them lower prices. And this is something that we can do easily and quickly with AWS and their auto-scaling functionality within EC2. Jumping back up to the global deduplicated storage, one thing I forgot to mention. Say you have multiple sites and you're doing your backups. Usually you'd be doing backups locally because you need to restore your data. The problem is each of your sites has their own independent deduplicated storage domains. With Druva, everything is globally deduplicated. So if I have 10 sites, if I have 100 sites, they all get globally deduplicated. So I'm saving additional costs because I don't need to worry about the additional copies that I'm storing in all these locations. With Druva, I'm only ever storing that one copy, which once again helps us save money. Finally, Glacier Deep Archive, a great feature for customers who are looking for some ultra cheap storage class because they have data that they stored on tape for years and years and years, and they're looking to figure out what they want to do with that. Druva, we now offer an intelligent tiering storage class, which allows us to figure out which data blocks need to be moved to something cheaper for your compliance needs. For instance, you might have data which you're never going to touch for 7 years. We will figure that out and move the data off to Glacier Deep Archive seamlessly behind the scenes. The customer doesn't have to worry about it. We do everything. All of these features that you see is part of our SaaS solution. You as a customer, you don't have to worry about what storage class do I need to pick. Do I pick S3, S3IA, Glacier Deep Archive? Druva is optimized. We help figure out what data needs to move where, and we do it automatically, alleviating you of that burden. Now, a question for Girish, right? This is great. We talked about what Druva does, but we have a lot of customers who still say, okay, I have on-premises data centers, and AWS, you guys are a cloud, you guys are off somewhere. How do I deal with getting all my data up to AWS?
Right. I mean, that's a very valid question. So let's take an example here. Let's say I have 100 terabytes of data in my on-premise data center, and I need to back it up to AWS. I have a 100 Mbps link, outgoing link. Guess how much time will it take for me to copy that data over? It'll take me 100 days, right, to do that transfer. So how can we be helpful over there, right? So AWS has a service called as AWS Snowball that basically provides ruggedized physical devices that you can use to move large data sets in and out of AWS. And we have a couple different models over there. One is the Snowball, which provides up to 80 terabytes of capacity. The next model is Snowball Edge, that in addition to storage, provides some compute capabilities as well. So this is designed for, in addition to your data transfers, it's designed for doing some sort of computing at the edge as well. And this one provides 100 terabytes of capacity. The next one is Snowmobile. Snowmobile is basically a shipping container sitting on a truck, right, and can be used to move petabytes of data in and out of AWS. So going back to the previous example, if I was to do this transfer using Snowball devices, I just need 2 of these Snowball devices, and I can do the transfer in 10 to 15 days, right, which is a massive improvement from the 100 days that it was going to take over the network. So Druva today supports Snowball Edge to move your large backup sets into AWS. And the integration is very slick, right? So you just go to the Druva console, say that I want to do the transfer using Snowball appliances and feed in the address, and that's about it. So Druva from that point onwards will take care of sending the devices to you, will help you with the copy process, and then once the devices are back at AWS, they'll do the copy back into your S3, into their S3 bucket, right? So in addition to this use case, Druva supports one more use case, which is exporting the data out and providing you a local copy of the data, of your backup data, onto a Snowball appliance. Now, this is helpful for scenarios where, let's say, you're doing some sort of a DR recovery test, where you need access to the local data for speed, right? So that's the second use case over there, and then.
Yeah, thanks, Girish. And in addition, Druva also supports what we call cloud cache. So as you know, or as you can tell, most of the data gets stored in the cloud. But you might have certain use cases where you need shorter RTOs. For instance, you need to be able to restore your database application in less than an hour. And pulling all that data back from the cloud may not make sense. Druva offers the ability to deploy a cloud cache, which is a software appliance on premises, in order to be able to locally cache that data. So when you do need to do the restore, the data comes off of your cloud cache for land speed restores, rather than having to pull back from the cloud, which is a very useful in some scenarios. Now, I don't know if people saw Andy Jassy's keynote today, but he also announced Outpost, which is AWS coming to the edge. By the way, Druva now supports Outpost as well, so you can deploy your cloud cache on top of Outpost in those environments where you want it. So you don't need your own infrastructure. If you have an Outpost, you can now just deploy cloud cache on that as well and be up and running for your tier 1 RTO needs. So when you're on this cloud journey and as you're thinking about data protection, this is data which is critical to your company, right? This is I kind of hate to use a phrase, but I know people say data is the new oil, right? But data is really important to the company. And so you have to really think about security. And what does it mean? How do I secure my data? Especially as you start to put data in a public cloud or with a SaaS solution. So I guess some of the things you have to worry about are, how do I ensure that my data is secure and encrypted and no one has access to my data? How do I protect my data from ransomware or other malicious actors? How do I ensure that everything is secure? Now, it's important to note that as you're on this cloud journey, it isn't any different than the problems that you would have seen when you were dealing with traditional data centers. There was still a security team worrying about encryption and security. You hopefully had someone hired who was worrying about making sure my data was encrypted and secure and everything else. Hopefully you had those security specialists. Not all organizations did. And so I guess, Girish, the question is, how is AWS helping customers in securing their data versus other things that are out there?
Sure. Yeah, so security at AWS, I mean, that's our top priority, right? So our cloud infrastructure is designed to meet the security requirements of high sensitivity organizations like the military, global banks, and various others, right? We have achieved over 200 plus compliance certifications and compliance, security, and governance, including ISO 27017, that's a standard for cloud security. 27018, that's a standard for cloud privacy, and then SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3. Customers are also PCI and HIPAA compliant when running on AWS, and we have achieved important certifications like FedRAMP, FIPS, and others in the public sector space. Okay? Now, one of the great things about running in AWS is that all of our customers get the benefit of the AWS policies, architecture, and the operational processes that are designed to meet the requirements of these security-conscious customers. Today, AWS has a shared responsibility model where AWS is responsible for managing the components, right, from your host operating system and virtualization layer down to the physical security of the infrastructure in which the services operate out of. And customers are responsible for running secure applications. Now, to help customers build secure applications, we have a wide variety of services. If you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So here is the list of services that we have on the security side, right? So we're not going to go through each one of these over here, but
it's a lot, Girish.
Thinking about it from a data management perspective, right? We can look at a few. So let's look at the infrastructure structure protection over here area. And under that, we have this concept of VPC, which stands for Virtual Private Cloud. And basically what that does is it gives you a logically isolated region inside of AWS where you can run your own resources in a virtual private network, right? You can define your own IP addresses. There is the concept of public and private subnets where you can run your internet-facing applications in a public subnet. And then all of the applications that do not need access to the outside world, they can be run securely inside the private subnet. Okay? Then there is the concept of security groups and network access control lists, which act as a firewall mechanism. In addition to that, we have services like AWS Shield, which protects you from distributed denial of service attacks, right? DDoS attacks. Then there is a web application firewall that protects you from application-level attacks such as SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and various others over there. Then if we shift our attention to the data protection area, right? So it is vital to meet regulatory compliance that all data that is stored at rest should be encrypted, and no user or application should be able to gain access to that data without the right encryption keys or decryption keys over there. So to help with that, we have a wide variety of options that help you encrypt the data and then manage your keys as well. So this is done via services like AWS KMS, and then there is Cloud HSM service as well. So to give you an example here, you can easily encrypt your EBS volumes, and then you can turn on server-side encryption, which uses AES 256 encryption algorithm. And then, so Prasanna, how are customers how are you guys protecting customers' data today?
So Druva is built on top of AWS. All of the things Girish talked about from a security standpoint, we inherit a lot of those features just by the fact that we are built leveraging a lot of the AWS services. One of the things when you think about backup, especially if you're in a traditional on-premises world, is how do I keep my backup safe? When I have my backups running in the same infrastructure, the same network as my production, if something happens, if someone gets access into my network, they can compromise my backups, they can compromise my production, and now I'm hosed. So with Druva, we are a natively air-gapped solution. We run on AWS. We store all of your data in AWS. There is no direct connectivity from any of your on-premises agents, clients, into your S3 data in the back end. Everything always goes through our own components, so no one should be able to access your data in S3. which helps in case ransomware hits your production instance. You always have your backups you can restore from. In addition, security is always important, and when you think, okay, I'm sending data over the wire, I should always be worried about, can someone sniff it out while it's going out? We provide end-to-end encryption using TLS to ensure that your data is encrypted and safe. In addition, if you are using Direct Connect, we also support that as well. And finally, let's talk about your actual backup data. You must be thinking, okay, Druva, you're a SaaS service, you have all these various customers, 4,000 plus enterprise customers, they're all storing data in S3. Don't you have access to the data? What happens if another customer tries to get access to the S3 bucket? How do you actually make sure people's data is segregate and they can't actually read the data? We leverage what we call digital envelope encryption. It's a fancy word to basically say there is a decryption key, and then there's another key that actually that encrypts that key, and that second key is actually based on customer's user credentials. The customer is the only one who can actually decrypt the actual key to your data. So if you are a customer and you lose your password, or if you only have one admin and then they quit, things like that, as Druva, we can't actually give you back your data. You have to make sure you remember your password, you set up multiple users, someone who can get access to your own data. If a government agency or anyone else comes and asks us, can we get access to this customer's data? We can't. We have no ability to actually read any of your data, right? Which is one thing you should think about as customers are putting data in the cloud or vendors are putting data in the cloud, who's controlling the keys? In the case of Druva, you, the customer, you own your keys. We have no control over those. Now, as you're on a cloud journey, it's also important to remember you don't want to build something in the traditional fashion. You're going on this journey, you're trying to simplify your life, you're trying to get exposed to new technologies, new ways of doing things. So you want to make sure you are built for the future, you're leveraging technologies that are built for the future. And with Druva, we are helping enable that. One thing with backup data is it's valuable, as we had talked about before, but the problem with backup data, especially if you have it sitting on tape or even if you have it sitting on premises on a storage array, is it's very difficult to try to do something more with the backup data without trying to bring in a bunch of compute on premises, pay for that compute in order to do the analytics or anything else you want to do. Instead, wouldn't it be great, Girish, if I already have all this backup data sitting in the cloud, if I was able to do more with that data?
Definitely. And one of the points that you mentioned is analytics, right? So to give you an example here, we were talking to one of the customers and in the automobile industry, right? So they have these huge, massive backup repositories. What they were looking for is gathering information on the VIN numbers of all the cars that they have seen, their system has seen. So how do you get that data, right? I mean, it's there in your backup repositories, but they have no easy way to access that. So that's one example, right? So we are working with them to see what can be done over there. But yeah, if you go to the next slide there, thanks. Yeah, so we have a broad choice of analytics services that are available in AWS. And what we have here is basically the various phases in a typical analytics workflow, right? Starting right from the discovery process, where you go about discovering the data, to ingesting that data into AWS. And then once you have the data, then you go about cleaning that data, preparing that data, and then analyzing it. Finally, visualizing that data to get the insights, right? So once the data is already into AWS, we can just look at or focus on the prepare and analyze phases over here. We have services like AWS Glue ETL. ETL is extract, transform, and load. What it can do is it can go and crawl data sources. It can figure out the data formats, and then it can suggest schemas and transformations on that data. What you can do there is you can connect it to a service like Athena on our side, which gives you a way to query that data using standard SQL queries, right? So in this case, I mean, if the data was already in AWS, they could have written a simple query, a SQL query to get all the VIN numbers, right? Then we have, or they could have connected to a service like EMR, which is Elastic MapReduce. And what that lets you do is it lets you run Hadoop and Spark and various other frameworks using which you can build really powerful analytics applications. Okay. We have other services like Amazon Macy, which is basically a machine learning powered security service. And what that does is it lets you detect any sort of sensitive data. So you can use it on your backup repositories if you want to get information about any sensitive data like PII data or intellectual property and things like that over there. On the machine learning side, we have services like SageMaker that lets you build, train, and deploy machine learning models. We have services like Recognition, which lets you analyze your images, your videos, and I think yesterday we announced the capability to analyze objects as well, right? So which is very powerful. So using these services, right, you can get really powerful insights into your secondary data, which is basically your backup data. Now think about doing this with your on-premise backup repository, right? Extremely difficult. You'll have to bring in infrastructure to run analytics, things like that over there.
Cool. So one other thing that Druva allows you to do is also to leverage your backups for disaster recovery. Now, in a traditional on-premises world, you would have to configure disaster recovery and figure out what do you want to do. And you have two choices. Option one is you pay a bunch of money to duplicate your production environment to a DR site somewhere else. And 99% of the time, it just sits idle because hopefully, cross your fingers, you never have a failure on your production. But you've sunk in all that cost, you're worrying about that equipment running, keeping it up to date, and then if you have to fail over, you're hoping, okay, I haven't really tested this, is it really going to work when it matters? Option two for on-premises is you do a DR based on your backup data. So you have your backup stored on disk and you figure out, okay, if something happens, I'll go restore to another application host or to another storage array, and I'll be up and running. And of course, now your backup admin is involved in doing these restores, but they're usually not involved in DR tests. They're just using file level restores or application server restores, not necessarily full site disaster recoveries. And so when something does happen, they're trying to figure out, okay, what do I do? And do I have all the steps in the right order? And am I testing this in the right way? And usually that doesn't work out so well. Now with Druva, because we have your backup stored in the cloud, we can now leverage the spin up, spin down features of Amazon to actually provide you a disaster recovery site in standby. In this example, you have your backup stored on the right-hand side in Druva's cloud, and we have the ability to actually update an image which sits in the customer's account such that when a failure happens of their production instances on premises, we can instantly spin it up in less than 15 minutes in the customer's account and they can be up and running. We periodically update this based on when new backups come in, and we make sure that on failover that you can actually orchestrate your order in which you want your virtual machines or your instances to come up. For instance, you might decide I have an application, when an issue happens, I need my Active Directory server to come up, and then I need my database, and then finally my web server, and that's the order. With Druva, you can actually orchestrate your entire runbook, have that stored, and in addition, you can actually test this. So instead of waiting for when a failure happens, you could periodically go and say, okay, once a week, I'm just going to test my runbook and see, does it work, does it not work, and if there are tweaks, I can actually tweak it and make sure it's successful before the actual production failure happens. Once it's running in the customer's VPC, they can decide, do I want to fail it back over to my on-premises infrastructure if I replace the equipment and get everything back up and running? Or maybe, hey, I like it where it runs, I'll just have it continue running in my VPC. And by the way, Druva also supports the ability to continue protecting those instances once they're spun up in AWS. We can take snapshots of those instances. We can make sure they're in cross-region and cross-accounts. And we can make sure that everything is orchestrated as well. So we can make sure you're protected on premises as well as in the cloud. So really, Druva and AWS are working together to help you on your cloud journey, and Druva specifically to help you protect while you're on this journey. You're trying to get to the cloud. Everyone is in different spots. Some people are just dipping their toes in, like Andy Jassy said this morning in his keynote. Some people are full in on AWS and have many, many production instances all running in the cloud. With Druva, we're helping you protect your environment no matter where you are in that spectrum. If you're barely getting started, we can continue protecting your on-premises workloads into the cloud. So then when you are ready to take that full step and go fully in AWS, it's not a big leap because we're already there helping protect your environment. Or if you're already in AWS, we can continue helping protect those workloads that are already running there. Backup is an easy workload to take to the cloud first. A lot of times when people think cloud journey, they think about, hey, I need to take my SAP instance or my application instance and start running in the cloud. Backup is a perfectly reasonable workload to move to the cloud first. And when you're on this cloud journey, do you want to bring in backup infrastructure, manage storage, manage capacity planning, all these other things that you're trying to get away from when you go with AWS? Probably not. So start thinking about what should you be doing as you're on this cloud journey. And hopefully you come back and you say, hey, Druva and AWS is what I need to get my business to where it needs to get to. So thank you everyone for this. And 3 comments. One is stop by our booth, 1115. We have prizes, there are booth presentations, there are demos. So feel free to stop by. I think we're giving away prizes with a scratcher. So come on by. And Girish and I will both be at the booth as well. And by the way, please make sure to fill out the survey on the mobile app. And we will be around for questions either here or in the booth, so come find us. Thank you so much.